It was one of those nights in New York City when winter's chill cut through even the thickest of coats, and the neon glow of advertisements and storefronts painted the pavement with fleeting hues of red, blue, and green. The bustling metropolis, ever vibrant, ever alive, seemed to be in perpetual motion as hurried footsteps, blaring car horns, and distant chatter wove together a tapestry of urban life. Amid the constant hum of activity, however, one singular, almost invisible figure remained, a quiet soul huddled on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk. Wrapped in a tattered, threadbare blanket that had seen far too many nights of bitter wind and rain, the man's presence spoke of hardship, neglect, and a past filled with both valor and sorrow. His eyes, sunken and heavy with memory, told a story no neon sign or corporate billboard could ever capture. Before him lay a crumpled piece of cardboard, its uneven, shaky handwriting declaring a simple, heartfelt message. "I am a veteran, please help." There was no theatrical plea in his demeanor. He neither extended a trembling hand nor shouted his sorrow for passers-by to hear. Instead, he sat in quiet resignation, as though he had long since accepted his fate as an invisible casualty of a society that never seemed to notice the forgotten. Hundreds of people ambled past him that night, each engrossed in their own hurried lives, barely glancing his way. Then, as if guided by destiny itself, a sleek black limousine glided to a stop directly in front of him. The vehicle, a symbol of affluence and power amid the urban chaos, exuded an air of authority as its door swung open. A deep, commanding voice broke through the ambient sounds of the city's night. "What's going on here?" The veteran, his name as he would later reveal was John Miller, lifted his weary eyes at the sound. Surprise flashed momentarily across his tired features before a flicker of uncertainty took its place. Standing there was none other than Donald Trump, a billionaire and former president, whose presence alone had the uncanny ability to shift the very atmosphere of any space. But in that moment, all that mattered was the stark contrast between the man before him and the man in the limousine. Without a moment's hesitation, Trump stepped forward. His polished leather shoes clicked decisively on the frozen pavement as his security detail watched with bated breath, their expressions a mixture of confusion and anticipation. A hush fell over the gathering crowd as two worlds, one of immense power and another of quiet desperation, prepared to collide in a conversation that none could have foreseen. Trump's face was set, his gaze unyielding as he approached John, the veteran who had once served his country with pride. "What brought you here?" he asked, his voice low and imbued with a genuine concern that belied the usual bravado for which he was known. For long moments, the veteran studied Trump's face, uncertain if this was another fleeting encounter or something real, something that might finally bring meaning to the years of silent suffering. Finally, with a voice roughened by both the bitter cold and the weight of memories, John whispered, "I was a Marine. I used to have a life." Those few words carried with them the pain of countless battles, not only on distant foreign fields, but also the internal wars that followed in their wake. In that fragile utterance lay the story of a life once defined by purpose and sacrifice, now reduced to a quiet existence on a crowded city sidewalk. Trump's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening as the realization of this abandoned hero's plight took hold. A stern frown etched itself across his features as he absorbed every syllable of John's confession. "You can't be here," he declared, the sentence falling like a verdict both on the situation and on the state of a nation that had forgotten its protectors. A murmur swept through the growing crowd as John instinctively tightened the grip on his thin, worn blanket, his only shield against the relentless indifference of a world that had long since moved on. The moment was heavy with significance. A moment in which a man of great power paused his busy schedule to acknowledge a man whose sacrifice had been met with nothing but neglect. Trump knelt slightly to meet John's eyes, his tone softening as he asked, "What's your name?" In that simple inquiry lay a promise of recognition, of a desire to finally hear the untold story of a man who had given everything for his country. After a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, John's voice, hoarse and laden with fatigue, broke the silence. John Miller. The name, whispered like a long-forgotten prayer, held within it the echoes of valor and the scars of loss. Trump's gaze remained locked on John's, his expression now one of genuine concern rather than condescension or pity. "John, I want to know your story," he said, his voice firm yet imbued with compassion. "Tell me, how does a man who once served this country end up here, on a busy New York street, invisible to the world?" John's eyes drifted down to his weathered hands that had once been strong and decisive in battle, now worn by the harshness of life on the streets. Taking a deep breath, as if summoning the courage to confront decades of buried memories, he began his tale. "I was born in a small town in Texas," John began, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile memory of happier times. "My father worked construction, my mother waited tables. We weren't rich, but we had a home, warm meals, and the kind of simple peace you only come to appreciate once it's gone." John's recollections carried him back to a time when life was simpler, a time of familial warmth and community, of small-town values that nurtured a sense of belonging. Yet even as he spoke of those days, the shadows of his later experiences loomed large. "At 22, I enlisted in the Marines," he continued. "I wanted to do something that mattered, to protect this country. In the beginning, I was proud, I was eager to serve, but nothing can prepare you for the horrors of war." He paused, his eyes momentarily glazing over as the memories flooded back. Memories of a vast, unforgiving desert in Afghanistan, where the sun scorched the earth by day and the bitter cold of night seeped into every bone. "We patrolled constantly, always on alert. By night, we huddled together, trying to find a semblance of sleep, not knowing if we'd see another dawn." John's voice faltered as he recalled the mission that had altered his life forever. "We were assigned to protect a small village. Everything was too quiet, and I remember telling my buddy Eddie that something felt off. And then, out of nowhere, we walked into an ambush. Gunfire erupted around us. Explosions shook the ground. I remember turning to Eddie, his eyes wide with fear, and then he was gone. I was hit, and I don't remember much after that." For a long moment, John's gaze wandered into the distance, as if he were still on that distant battlefield. "I woke up later, lying among the bodies of my brothers in arms. I survived, but a part of me died that day." Trump listened intently, his stern expression softening further as the magnitude of John's loss sank in. The veteran's tale was not simply one of physical wounds, but of scars that no amount of healing could erase, the nightmares, the memories that haunted every moment of wakefulness. "When I came home," John said bitterly, "everything had changed. People told me I was lucky to be alive, but they couldn't understand the nightmares that kept me awake. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't work. My family, they said I wasn't the same person anymore. And then I lost my job, I lost my home. And before I knew it, I was just forgotten." A deep, painful laugh escaped him, a laugh that resonated with the weight of a lifetime's worth of unspoken sorrow. "One day, I was a soldier. a man with purpose, with honor. And the next, I was just another drifter on these streets, invisible to the world. Trump's eyes, now glistening with an emotion he had rarely allowed himself to show, fixed on John. "Do you know what the worst part is?" John's voice cracked, his words heavy with the burden of his truth. "It's not the cold or the hunger or the endless nights on the pavement. It's knowing that I've been forgotten, that the world moved on, leaving me behind, as if I never existed." A profound silence settled between them, a silence that was filled not with judgment, but with shared understanding. Trump inhaled slowly, his expression hardening with resolve as he finally spoke words that would change the course of John's life forever. "John, a man like you should never have to live like this," he said, his tone firm and deliberate. "You fought for America, now it's time for America to fight for you." At that moment, something shifted in the frozen night. The weight of abandonment, the years of silent suffering, all seemed to lift just a little. For the first time in years, John felt a flicker of hope, a hope that maybe he wasn't invisible after all. John sat there, staring at Trump with a mixture of disbelief and cautious expectation. He adjusted the thin blanket around his shoulders as if to ward off both the cold and the memories of a past that had scarred him deeply. "I was born in a small town in Texas," he began again, as if finding strength in the repetition of his story. "My father was a construction worker, my mother waited tables. We weren't rich, but we had a home, warm meals, and the kind of simple peace you only realize is precious once it's gone." His voice steadied slightly as he continued, recounting the early days of his military service. "At 22, I enlisted in the Marines. I wanted to do something that mattered, to protect this country. I was proud, I was eager, but nothing can prepare you for war." John's eyes grew distant as he recalled the harsh realities of Afghanistan. By day we were constantly on alert, by night we tried to sleep, never knowing if we'd wake up again. And then one day, everything changed. We were assigned to protect a small village. It was too quiet, too calm. I remember telling my buddy Eddie that something felt off. And then, out of nowhere, we were ambushed. Gunfire tore through the air, explosions shook the ground. I remember turning to look at Eddie, his eyes wide with fear, and then he was gone. I was hit, and when I awoke, I was surrounded by the bodies of my comrades. I survived, but a part of me died on that day. Trump's jaw tightened as he absorbed every painful detail of John's narrative. His hands formed small, almost unconscious fists. Not out of anger, but out of an overwhelming sense of responsibility for the heroes who had been forgotten. "When I got back home," John continued, his voice laced with despair, "nothing felt the same anymore. People said I was lucky to be alive, but they didn't see the nightmares. They didn't understand that I couldn't sleep, that I couldn't function like I used to. I tried to move on, but no one wanted to hire a veteran with PTSD. I turned to drink to dull the pain, and before I knew it, I lost everything. A home, a family, a heavy silence fell over them as John's words lingered in the cold night air. The truth of his experience was a mirror reflecting the failures of a society that had once celebrated his sacrifice, only to cast him aside when he needed help the most. "Day," John said quietly. "My wife told me to leave. She couldn't handle waking up to my screams in the middle of the night. I lost my home, my family, everything. I started sleeping outside, scavenging for food, until I realized that I was nothing to this world. I was invisible, a ghost wandering the streets." Trump's face grew even more resolute as he listened to John's confession. His voice, steady and imbued with a deep sense of commitment, broke the quiet. "John, This is not how America should treat its heroes." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You gave everything for this country, and I will not let this country abandon you again." For the first time in a long while, tears welled in John's eyes. They were not tears solely of sorrow, but of a fragile hope. A hope that maybe someone with enough influence to change things, finally cared enough to take action. "Listen," Trump continued, his tone softening. "I'm not here just to listen. I'm here to help you reclaim your life." He reached out and patted John's shoulder with a reassuring firmness. "You fought for America. Now it's time for America to fight for you." The impact of Trump's words rippled through the small circle of onlookers. The crowd, once content to pass by in their own worlds, now watched with bated breath as a sequence of events unfolded that would change John's destiny. Trump's assistant, who had been nervously checking his phone, suddenly found himself receiving a flurry of new instructions. "I need a hotel room right now. Warm, clean, and secure, and a top doctor experienced with veterans," Trump said without hesitation, his voice brooking no delay. In the background, one of his security personnel hurriedly nodded and moved to execute the command. "And get him a new set of clothes, something decent, something that shows respect," he added. The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Whispers turned to murmurs, and soon many began recording the scene on their smartphones. Some could hardly believe what they were witnessing. A billionaire and former president standing on a freezing New York sidewalk, orchestrating a rescue for a homeless veteran. A middle-aged woman, wrapped in a thick coat and with a look of determined compassion, stepped forward. "Mr. Trump, if you need any help finding a trustworthy veteran support organization, I can assist," she offered, her voice firm with resolve. Trump turned to her, nodding appreciatively. "Yes," he replied. "I want to make sure this is not just a temporary fix. We need a long-term plan to ensure that heroes like John are never forgotten again." As the conversation continued, John, still seated on the cold pavement, could hardly believe what was unfolding. Each word from Trump resonated like a promise, each directive a guarantee that his life, once discarded, was now worth saving. His eyes, once dull with resignation, shone with a glimmer of hope. A hope that was almost too fragile to believe in. Without another moment's delay, Trump pulled out his phone once again. "I need a luxury hotel room immediately, the best one available, fully equipped," he said, his tone crisp and decisive. The assistant on the other end hesitated momentarily, as if the request were surreal. But Trump's command left no room for negotiation. As the instructions flew fast and furious, John's mind raced. He had spent so many years in the shadows, believing himself to be invisible, unwanted, unworthy. Now, here was one of the most powerful men in America using his influence, not for politics, not for profit, but to help him, a veteran who had sacrificed so much for his country. Within minutes, a high-end hotel representative called to confirm that the presidential suite at the Plaza Hotel was ready. The details were confirmed, and an opulent SUV soon pulled up to the curb. Trump turned back to John, who still sat frozen, his face a mixture of disbelief and trepidation. "Mr. Trump," John managed to say, his voice barely audible, "I can't go to a place like that. Look at me." His words were laden with the weight of years on the street, of a life marked by neglect. Trump's response was immediate and unwavering. "You spent your life serving this country," he said firmly. "No one has the right to say you don't deserve better." At that moment, as if on cue, the black SUV's door swung open. Trump extended his hand once more, firm, strong, and resolute, and said, "Let's go." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, John's trembling hand reached up and grasped Trump's. In that gesture, the barriers of isolation and despair began to crumble. With Trump's help, John slowly rose to his feet, leaving behind the familiar chill of the sidewalk and stepping into the unknown promise of a new beginning. Inside the luxurious SUV, the atmosphere was quiet and introspective. The city lights zipped by as New York's sprawling urban tapestry unfurled outside the windows. A mesmerizing blend of glittering skyscrapers and bustling streets. John sat in silence, the surreal nature of his rescue sinking in with every passing moment. Each turn of the wheel, every distant honk and flash of neon seemed to mark the departure from a life of neglect to one filled with possibility. Trump, seated nearby, kept his gaze occasionally fixed on John. There was no need for words in those moments. Each shared glance carried the weight of promises made, of a future where John's sacrifices would finally be honored. As the SUV made its way through the city's labyrinthine streets, the online world erupted with the news. Social media platforms lit up with photos and videos of the encounter. A powerful, rare image of a former president pausing his busy life to help a homeless veteran. Captions filled with shock, emotion, and calls for change were shared widely. Messages that asked, "If this can happen, why aren't we doing more?" The story of John Miller was no longer confined to a cold New York sidewalk. It was a rallying cry that transcended partisan divides and stirred the hearts of millions. At the Plaza Hotel, a monument to New York's enduring grandeur, the SUV finally pulled up to the curb. The building's facade glowed warmly against the winter night, its golden lights reflecting on the wet pavement like beacons of hope. John stared at the imposing entrance, a mixture of awe and disbelief etched on his face. Had he ever known anything like this? Could a life that had once been so filled with despair now hold the promise of renewal? Trump was the first to step out. He moved with the confidence of a man who knew the world, and yet tonight he was a man who had chosen to stand with a forgotten hero. He turned back, extending his hand in invitation. "Come on, John." John hesitated for a long moment. Memories of judgmental stares, harsh winds, and relentless nights in the cold flickered in his mind. But something in Trump's steady, caring eyes urged him on. With a deep breath, John reached out, placing his rough, weathered hand in Trump's. It was a small gesture, but in that instant it carried the promise of transformation. Inside the hotel lobby, staff moved quickly and efficiently. A well-dressed manager greeted them with a polite smile, tinged with curiosity, as he glanced at the disheveled man who now accompanied Trump. "Mr. Trump, the presidential suite is ready," the manager announced. John's eyes widened. The very idea of a presidential suite, a place of luxury and dignity, was something he had never imagined for himself. Trump nodded, his expression softening. "John, you've spent too many nights on the sidewalk. Tonight, you deserve to sleep in a real bed." There was no room for protest. In that moment, the undeniable truth was that a man who had once been a hero was finally being seen and valued. As John was led into the presidential suite, a spacious, opulently furnished room filled with warm lighting and soft, inviting textures, the weight of his past began to ease just a fraction. The suite was more than a symbol of luxury. It was a safe haven where he could begin to rebuild his life. Trump, meanwhile, continued to orchestrate the next steps of his plan. On his phone, he issued further commands. Arrange for a top doctor, secure long-term support from veteran care programs, and ensure that John would receive new clothes. Items that would help him not just look, but feel respected. Outside, as night gave way to the soft prelude of dawn, the news of the encounter had taken on a life of its own. Social media posts and news broadcasts spoke of the extraordinary meeting on that freezing New York night. Reactions poured in from every corner of the country. Many hailed the event as a powerful act of compassion, an act that bridged the gap between those in positions of power and those who had paid the highest price for their country's safety. Others, however, remained skeptical, questioning whether such an act could be anything more than a calculated publicity stunt. Despite the differing opinions, one truth remained unchallenged. John Miller's story had touched the hearts of millions, igniting a conversation about how veterans were treated once they returned home. In the days that followed, John's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. With the assistance arranged by Trump and the support of local veteran organizations, he slowly started to rebuild the shattered pieces of his existence. He attended therapy sessions designed specifically for veterans coping with post-traumatic stress disorder, learned to navigate the labyrinth of modern life once again, and gradually began to reconnect with a society that had once seemed so indifferent. In interviews, John spoke of that fateful night with a voice that was growing stronger with each retelling. "I used to feel invisible," he admitted, his eyes reflecting both the pain of his past and the promise of a better future. "But that night, someone saw me. For the first time in years, I felt like I mattered." His words resonated with thousands who had suffered in silence, serving as a reminder that even in the depths of despair, hope could be found. Trump, too, found that the encounter had a profound impact on him. It spurred him to become more involved in veteran affairs, participating in forums and discussions aimed at reforming the systems that had failed so many. His actions that night, whether viewed as a spontaneous gesture of kindness or as part of a larger plan, had ignited a movement that would press for change in the treatment and support of America's heroes. As weeks turned into months, John's transformation was evident. The scars of his past remained, but they no longer defined him. With the help of compassionate professionals and the support of newfound friends, he began to see a future that was not entirely overshadowed by the ghosts of war. He shared his story at community events and became an advocate for veterans, urging society to recognize that every man and woman who had served deserved dignity and care. One crisp autumn evening, as the leaves outside turned shades of gold and amber, John found himself standing before a small group of veterans at a community center. In a moment of vulnerability, he recounted the details of that cold New York night, the fear, the despair, and ultimately the compassion that had saved him. His voice, once broken and hushed, now rang clear and resolute as he said, "You fought for America. Now it's time for America to fight for you." The words, echoing the promise Trump had made that night, resonated deeply with everyone in the room. John Miller's story had become more than just a personal narrative. It had sparked a broader conversation about how veterans were treated upon returning home. Donations to veteran support organizations surged, community groups rallied to provide assistance, and even local politicians began to address the systemic issues that left so many heroes abandoned. The story was featured in newspapers, on television, and across social media platforms, igniting debates and discussions that spanned the country. Critics of Trump's past policies and rhetoric were forced to confront a narrative that transcended political divides. Whether viewed as a sincere act of compassion or as a calculated political move, the impact was undeniable. A once-forgotten veteran was now at the center of a national dialogue about care, respect, and accountability. For many, John's journey became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that every individual, no matter how small or seemingly invisible, deserved a chance to rebuild their life. As spring arrived in New York, the city itself seemed to transform. The once harsh winter gave way to milder days and the promise of renewal. John, now supported by a network of friends, medical professionals, and advocates, embraced the change. He found himself looking forward to each new day, a day filled with possibilities rather than despair. The memory of that cold night, when a man in a suit had stopped to listen, remained etched in his heart as both a turning point and a beacon of hope. Trump, too, continued to check in on John, ensuring that the support systems he had helped put in place were working. Their occasional phone calls and meetings, set against the backdrop of New York's ever-changing skyline, served as quiet reminders that real change often began with one simple act of kindness. In the months and years that followed, John Miller's life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. No longer defined solely by his experiences of loss and hardship, he began to forge a new identity, one rooted in resilience, gratitude, and a newfound purpose. He became a speaker and advocate for veterans' rights, sharing his story not to garner sympathy, but to inspire action and foster understanding. His journey from the cold pavement to the warmth of a real bed became a powerful narrative that transcended individual experience, speaking to the collective need for compassion and systemic change. John's transformation was not without its challenges. There were days when the memories of war and neglect threatened to overwhelm him, when the scars of his past felt too deep to heal. But, with the support of those who cared, and with the steady reminder that he was no longer invisible, he continued to move forward, one step at a time. His advocacy led him to collaborate with veteran support organizations, helping to establish programs that provided counseling, job training, and long-term support for veterans in need. And as his story spread, others like him found the courage to share their own experiences. John's journey, which had begun on that frigid New York sidewalk, had ignited a movement, one that reached far beyond the confines of a single encounter. It became a call to action for communities across the nation, urging them to look after those who had once given everything in service of their country. Trump's involvement in veteran affairs grew as well. No longer content with merely making headlines, he began to participate in discussions and initiatives aimed at reforming the support systems for veterans. Though opinions about his motivations varied, there was no denying the impact of that cold winter night, the night when a man who had once been invisible was finally seen, and when a promise was made that would echo across the country. Years later, as New York continued its relentless pace, the story of that fateful encounter was remembered not just as an isolated act of kindness, but as a catalyst for change. Memorials were dedicated, public policies were re-examined, and countless lives were touched by the ripple effect of that single, compassionate moment. John Miller, now a respected voice among his fellow veterans, often reflected on how a cold night had transformed his destiny. In interviews, he would say, "That night I was given a second chance, a chance to be heard, to be valued, and to rebuild my life." It wasn't just about one man's act of kindness. It was about showing that every veteran deserves to be cared for, every sacrifice recognized. For Trump, too, the encounters served as a reminder that leadership sometimes meant stepping away from the boardroom or the political arena and addressing the real, often painful needs of everyday people. His involvement in veteran support initiatives, born from that encounter, had become a cornerstone of his later years, a legacy that would be remembered as much for its compassion as for its controversy. In community centers and public halls across America, John's story was recounted as a powerful testament to the transformative power of empathy and action. It was a story that bridged divides, brought attention to long-ignored issues, and, most importantly, reminded a nation of the debt it owed to its heroes. As the seasons turned and time marched on, the legacy of that freezing New York night lived on in the hearts and minds of countless individuals. In a city that never stopped moving, where millions came and went each day, the memory of a man once left behind on the cold pavement now symbolized hope, renewal, and the possibility that even the most forgotten souls could find a path back into the light. On a clear winter evening several years later, as New York City's lights shimmered against a starry sky, John Miller, no longer a homeless veteran but a man reborn, visited a small park near the place where his life had once seemed irretrievably lost. In a quiet moment of reflection, he sat on a bench, the memories of that fateful night mingling with the peaceful murmur of the city. He recalled the sound of a deep, authoritative voice cutting through the cold, a voice that had asked, "What's going on here?" And he remembered the steady, compassionate gaze of a man who had made a promise. "You fought for America. Now it's time for America to fight for you." John knew that life was still fraught with challenges, that the scars of his past might never completely fade. But he also knew that on that winter night, something extraordinary had happened. A single act of kindness had set in motion a series of events that not only changed his life, but also sparked a movement to support all those who had served their country. As he sat there, a gentle smile crept onto his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the memory to warm him from within. In his heart, he carried the knowledge that while the journey toward healing was ongoing, he was no longer alone. The promise made on that cold New York night was not just a memory. It was a living legacy, one that would continue to inspire and remind every hero that they mattered. And so, the story of John Miller, the homeless veteran rescued on a bitter winter's night, remained a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of compassion and the promise that no one who serves will ever be left behind. In the years that followed, John's life became a testament to the enduring human spirit. He dedicated himself to helping others, working with organizations to improve mental health care, employment opportunities, and housing for veterans. His story was shared at schools, in community centers, and even in legislative halls, urging policymakers to re-examine and reform the systems that had failed so many. Trump's role in this unfolding narrative continued to be a subject of debate. Some saw his actions as a genuine transformation, a moment when personal conviction overcame public perception, while others remained skeptical. Regardless, the tangible improvements in veteran care that followed could not be denied. New programs were instituted, funding increased, and communities rallied around those who had sacrificed for their country. John Miller's journey, from the depths of despair on a freezing sidewalk to the warmth of a presidential suite and beyond, became more than just a personal transformation. It was a call to action for a nation. His legacy reminded everyone that every veteran, every person who has given their all, deserves a second chance and the support necessary to reclaim their lives. And as New York City continued its eternal dance of lights and life, the promise made on that unforgettable night endured. It was a promise of hope, of change, and of the belief that no hero should ever be forgotten. This expanded narrative, spanning a cold New York night to the unfolding of a new future, is a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, compassion can spark a revolution. What began with a simple question on a desolate sidewalk became a powerful movement, one that transformed a forgotten veteran's life and shone a light on the countless heroes still waiting in the shadows. John Miller's story is one of loss, struggle, and ultimately redemption. A story that proves that every life, no matter how battered or overlooked, is worthy of dignity, respect, and care. And for every person who hears this story, there is a call to action, to look beyond our differences, to see the humanity in one another, and to ensure that no one is ever left to freeze on the sidelines. In the end, the true measure of a society is not found in its wealth or its towering buildings, but in the compassion it shows to those who have given everything for the greater good. And on that unforgettable night, a billionaire, a former president, and a homeless veteran came together, their lives forever intertwined by a promise that would ripple across the nation and remind us all that every hero deserves a second chance.